Good evening, welcome to the Goffstown Planning Board. This is a scheduled meeting for a proposed zoning amendments workshop. We will start with introductions with our planning director.
Joanne Duffy, Planning and Economic Development Director.
Are we supposed to do a pledge of allegiance?
We can do that later.
Phil
Go ahead.
Devanza.
Scott Ozana, Town Engineer.
Tim Redmond.
Colleen Mayu.
Leonard Stewart, Chairman of the Zoning Board of Adjustment.
Barbara Griffin.
Richard Freeman.
Dave Pierce.
Thank you all for being here. Now, in light of what Phil reminded me, we'll say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you.
All right, we have minutes to approve tonight. We have an old set of minutes from September the 26th.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Is there any discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? Motion passes.
Joanne, I'm abstaining on that. I just
Okay.
made that.
We have one abstention. Okay, the other minutes are from October the 10th.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Same motion from Phil and Barbara. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstention, motion passes. Okay, let's just get rid of the code of conduct. We have a revised code of conduct. Joanne, could you just tell people what the change that was made to it is?
Yes.
Page?
Let me just find it here. It's marked. The select board changed section N, harassment for elected or appointed officials.
Can you tell us what page that's on, by any chance?
6 of 8.
6 of 8, thank you, Dave. Okay, go ahead, now we got it.
That talks about amending section 4, complaints, clarifying that state law does not allow for town or select board action for alleged violations of the code of conduct by elected, appointed board members.
Anybody have any questions for Joanne? Does anybody have any comments or statements about the changes that have been proposed? Joanne, what's the proper path to take this? Do we have to just accept it, or do we have to, we don't have to make a motion, do we?
Just acknowledge that you've read it.
Alright. Is there do we have the form that we used to have where you had to read it and sign the form and turn it in that you?
They didn't give us one, they just wanted us to pass it out and have the board members read it.
Alright, well, that's kind of a pointless effort, because if you don't sign the form that states that you received the code of conduct and read the changes, it's a moot point.
It's all sort of moot because the change clarifies that you can't take any action with an elected official in regards to the conduct. So,
Through the state, it says.
right.
Okay, so let's just move on.
Okay.
So the board has, for the record, the board has received the changes of the code of conduct that was brought forth by the Board of Selectmen, and every member has received a copy of it, and that's as far as I'm willing to take it at this point. All right, Joanne, we are on to the 2025 proposed zoning amendments, and I am going to turn it over to the Vice Chair, Colleen.
Len, thanks for being here. Len and Barbara and I met with Joanne and went through some initial discussions on these proposed zoning amendments. I won't read all of this to everyone, you have it here for you, but I'll give you the summary on each of these, what the driving force, I guess, behind some of these changes are.
How are we gonna do? We gonna do it by page? Colleen, so we can follow? Are you gonna do it by
No,
number?
you can do it by number,
Yeah,
it
I'm
makes
just
more
gonna
sense.
start with number one and.
Okay, then I'll let you,
Work on
and
down.
just when you change topics, just change the number verbally so we can all keep up with it.
Okay, yep. So the first item, number one, definition of terms of butter. So the underlined section is new language that is the result of a statutory change that changed how abutters are defined. So it inserts language that I think I would say is not clarifying and is quite confusing, but it's the new state law, so we have to make the change. So it inserts language describing how an abutter is determined, not just directly across the street or stream, but defines directly across the street or stream, determined by lines drawn perpendicular. It's convoluted language, but this is the statute, so I think we need to accept to make this change.
Colleen, if I could just add, on the back of your changes, you have a bunch of pages that look like this, that start with changes to planning and zoning laws in 2014, a guide for municipalities. So planning staff got this from NHMA. It comes out every year after the legislative session is over. If you go to page 3 of those changes, 13, and the top of the page, 1359, that's where Joanne got, the law changed, so we need to change the butter. So if you wanted more info on that, you would put number 1 next to HB 1359 and you'd compare the two. But that's where that came from, so when we met, and so when Colleen goes through it, if I can find it, because I left my marked up copy at home, I'll tell you where it's in the,
I'm sure you can keep up.
I have a question.
Oh.
It specifically says across street or stream. What about a different body of water, like a pond?
A lake.
It doesn't even, it says steam. There's no R in the word. It says steam, not stream.
the one on the right at the end of there's a typo.
Yeah.
You had them going.
On the
for it.
proposed one or on the
Steam, like through the
actual-
fog.
Right here,
it says, steam.
right there on the
Yeah,
page,
but-
I circled it.
I guess, though, the question is, does that mean that that doesn't apply to a lake or a pond?
I think it applies to bodies of water and they just
Well, it
use.
says
stream.
No, I don't think it does apply to
No.
bodies of water. I
No.
think it
No.
would
The stream
specifically
is
say
pretty-
that.
You wouldn't
It's
have
kind
to
of
apply, you wouldn't have to give notice to somebody on the other side of Glen Lake.
Yeah, we do.
But we do, I don't know that you need to.
That's
Well, what about
how-
a smaller pond?
Well, no, because, no, that fell into my category with that property up on Acorn and Page. You guys told me because I'm on the other side of the pond, I don't have about that.
I think it says what it says. It says stream. And a
Yeah,
stream is a stream. It's not a river,
No,
it's
I-
not a
There's a
lake, it's not a
definition
pond.
for
So
stream.
stream is the key word in that sentence by statute, and if it's a river, it's not applicable. Because it says stream.
Okay.
And that's how, isn't that how David and Barbara both been at the state? Isn't that how you
if the
interpret?
word is clear.
Word is a word, you follow the word in the law.
If it's not ambiguous, you simply follow the ordinary meaning of the word.
Fine. So
And if residents come in,
they can read the HB 1358.
I understand it.
They can come in and ask to be notified, and we can do it as a courtesy and ask the applicant to do it as a courtesy, but for what we require for our butters notice, we'll follow this.
It's not required. That needs to go back to the legislature. If anybody wants to make it other than the word stream, it needs to go back to the legislature at this point.
Well, there's a lot of properties that don't have set bounds. They go by a legal description.
Even in the deed, there's not set bounds in a deed?
No.
Not the old ones.
Yeah, some properties say like basically the edge of water.
No, or they'll say from the oak tree down to along the stone wall.
Well, then wouldn't the burden of proof fall upon the landowner? If it's not easily, then the landowner needs to say, look, there's my bound there. How do we know it's your bound? There's 50 oak trees on the street.
Well, when you're getting into, the reason why I say this is when you get into things of where the property lines are and you're gonna go by some type of a marker, there are a lot of properties that they've never been surveyed. They don't have bounds.
And what have we done in the past, Phil?
We do notice now.
What have we done in the past, Phil, with those types of properties?
Yeah, but we took them differently. They're talking about pairs of corner boundaries along the stream or pairs of points on that intersect these perpendicular lines. How do you determine that on one that hasn't been surveyed and has no bounds?
If this is up, if the legislature wrote
It
this.
still has a boundary, Phil. It's not, it may not have a legal description, but it
Okay.
still has a bound. I see what you're saying, but just because it's not a legal description, it has a line. So
You're
the
saying if there's not a
line,
physical bound?
yeah.
Yeah, there's sometimes surveyors do research and they come up with not great information about property bounds, but, I mean, at that point, it's probably,
Well, I was just,
you know, your best.
You need to define property bounds then for your description. I mean, I have drill holes on my property, and I have iron rods, and I have iron pipes, and I have corners of the stone
Yeah,
wall.
but that's because you like to put that stuff in the ground. so
No,
you
that
have
was
them
all there from whenever that property was laid out 100 years ago.
Yeah, mine actually has a couple turning points. They're not on corners, but there's, you know, there's no bound. There's just a direction and a turning point.
And if it happens to be a stone wall, generally speaking, you and your land property owner each own half the wall.
And just.
And the wall could be gone at this point, too.
Just so, the current abutter definition also has street or stream in it. So the stream piece of
Okay.
this is not the new
Not
piece.
new.
right, okay.
The new part is these perpendicular lines
Right,
drawn
yeah.
from corner
So-
boundaries. I think corner boundary, so.
What is-
leaves ambiguity.
So the underlying portions of these,
The underlying portion is the new language being inserted.
but street or stream is not new language because it's in the old
It
definition.
was in the old definition. Well, so the first street or stream was in our old definition and was in the,
So they want to
definition
eliminate the
section.
first 3 lines, is that what you're saying?
No,
No.
keeping the first 3 lines, adding the underlined part.
Then remove the
And
word
then-
insert and add that next piece. Or not? Does the word insert stay in the definition, Barbara?
No, I think
No,
that
insert
Joanne
is
just
for
put that
your-
there for
That's for-
clarification.
For
Clarification.
editing,
Wants to know that that's
for
where the
notice
insert
purposes.
starts.
All right,
I do think, Joanne, when this is being written up or described for public notice, we should make clear that this revision is in order to meet, you know, the new statutory, so HB 1359. So I think just so that way people aren't saying, what were these crazy planning board members coming up with? Like, I don't want this to seem like we're inventing this language. I
so
want it
similar to
be
where
clear.
similar where
Yeah.
RSA 356-B 23 is, this being removed.
Yeah.
You would insert per HB 1359 or something to that effect?
I think not inserting it into the actual zoning
no,
ordinance,
just
but I
put
think
it
for the
below it.
write-up,
Sure.
that goes with it, explaining what the change is, I think it's
Okay.
to be the changes in state law.
But not footnoted anywhere.
I wouldn't footnote it.
Okay.
For the public hearing, we're talking
For the
about.
public hearing, yeah, that was my,
Okay. Not for the warrant
I'm
necessarily.
thinking when someone goes to back and wants to know why that, the definition is drawn the way it is, if there was a footnote right after it, said per HB 1359 adoption, then you don't
Yeah,
have to
but
go
it's
looking for the answer.
technically, there's a session number that goes with HB
Okay.
1259, because
You're-
there's a new HB
You're
1259,
privileged
whatever it
to
is
that.
every year.
Okay, any more questions or opposition to this new definition of terms of butter? As proposed by HB 1359.
So this
Okay.
is basically stating that you basically have these imaginary perpendicular lines out from the boundary, then 50 feet over, across the stream or street, those are abutters
yeah.
So
that
the
need notification.
50-foot segment picks up the
A
diagonal
diagonal, yeah,
abutter.
okay. They definitely could have written that better,
Yeah.
but.
The word perpendicular implies a right angle, right, David? Perpendicular
I'm
implies
assuming-
right
I'm
angle.
assuming perpendicular means perpendicular across the right of way.
Okay, That's not the line.
What if your right-of-way lines aren't parallel with each other?
Yeah.
There you go. See, that's
And if
where
it's a curve, it
that's
would
where
need to be
it's-
radial.
It's so
Prepare-
poorly,
Start
Prepare
off.
for
Always a
another rule
perpendicular to
next
a
year.
curve.
it's so
There
poorly
is.
written, it's comical.
The
Okay.
legislature.
Hope the legislatures are watching our meeting tonight. All right, anything else on number 1? Thank you, Colleen.
So, in number 2 and number 3, I'm gonna take together, and I recommend when these be or when we propose this be one article, because the passage of each depends on each other. So this is adding, we currently have a definition of term floor area gross. We'd be adding a new definition.
Read the original, read what the
Yeah.
current language is first, please.
So the current language, and we would be keeping the current language, floor area gross is any such floor space intended and designed for accessory heating and ventilation equipment shall include the horizontal area of each floor level devoted to stairwell and elevator shafts. So that's when we're defining floor area gross is, and this is relevant to accessory dwelling units, as we'll get, gross floor area includes all of that, the unconditioned space, the space associated with the heating equipment, ventilation equipment, whatnot. So the gross floor area is that larger footprint. We'd be adding here a new definition of floor area net, which would be the total of all floor areas of a building, excluding the stairwells, elevator shafts, equipment rooms, interior vehicular parking or loading, and all floors below the first or ground floor, except when these are used or intended to be used for human habitation or service to the public. So the net floor area definition is trying to establish for the calculation of the area of an accessory dwelling unit is going to be based on net floor area, which is the habitable area. So we're taking out the ventilation rooms, your HVAC equipment, your
So-
stairways.
So is the current language going away or staying?
The current language, I believe Joanne is staying. We're adding an additional definition of net floor
We don't
area,
have one now.
because we don't have one for net floor area. And then what we are doing, number 3 is associated with this, where the accessory dwelling units, we are, in this, it's not here, so if you look at your ordinance, you'll see that gross floor area is gonna be amended to net floor area, so where we have that size limitation on your accessory dwelling unit size is going to be calculated based on the net floor area, so the habitable space.
Why was the thought to exclude interior vehicular parking or loading?
Leaving the garage area out of the
I think
calculation.
that's a bad idea myself, because there's so many people that convert garages into living space, because they can be heated, they have siding, they have windows, they have doors. I think that's a mistake, because that will become an area where after the whole thing is completed, they're gonna move into the garage and add 24 by 24, which is 400 and change square feet, to beyond the allowable calculation. It happens a lot. So I don't like the idea of excluding the interior vehicular parking. I see it happen, that's why I'm stating that opinion.
We could take that out.
No, I'm not saying to take it out, I want it up for discussion. If anybody disagrees or agrees, because it's a group decision, not mine. This is
Well,
my
I mean,
point.
I think you're right. The intent was that this is the calculation that's going to go to what the permanent living space is going to be for
Right.
the ADU.
Right.
So, but the living space calculation for the ADU is the actual living space. If they then are after the fact converting garage to additional living space, then they're needing to come in for a variance for the size of the accessory dwelling unit.
They will never do that.
Except
never-
that they
but-
They
don't.
will never do that, they won't even get a permit to move in there.
Yeah,
And
but
who's
is
gonna
that, but how do we,
I have
is this a
not,
problem that do we think it's a problem, or we know this is a problem?
I haven't seen any accessory dwelling units with garages. Usually they use one, if there's a 2 or a 3 car garage, they use one of the spaces that's already there for the single family home. But I haven't seen any
If you
ADU
put an
build a
accessory
garage.
dwelling unit, and we have one in town that got whatever at the ZBA, to add a second level. The point, what Tim is talking about, for example, is you put a second story on a garage and you make that your ADU. You get your approval, all of a sudden your parking space goes away and you turn what was the garage into additional living space after the fact. And from the exterior, you'd never know.
We've also had a case come before the ZBA within the last couple of years where there was one of those off the books, off the record conversions of the entire garage space into an ADU with no building permits, nothing, and wanted to come in and have it blessed after the fact, and it was blessed, but we made him get every inspection that he would have had to pass, so it probably ended up costing him more money to do it that way than it would have to do it the right way in the first place. But they do come up and we have seen them.
To me, I think it's an enforcement issue. And so I think that I don't have a problem with leaving the garage out of this calculation, but
know,
it's an enforcement issue.
An enforcement
and if you
issue
don't
is something that,
Yeah.
that, I believe our system works that the code enforcement officer does not go out and actively look for violations.
You know,
They act on complaints. So if no one ever knows about this and no one ever complains about it, it will never be caught.
It's only gonna come up when the house goes up for sale and they're trying to get a permit and know for their refinancing mortgage.
These definitions guide this board in our deliberations of a plan. We shouldn't be extracting what-if situations 10 years down the road. These are just definitions for the board when we're considering an application.
That's a good point. And then we- and
I
then we-
guess after the discussion, I think that the point was, when we talked about adopting this, was people are complaining about the 800-foot limitation. We don't want to get into bigger units, they just need a little bit more. Our discussion in our little subcommittee meeting was actually talking about off of the floor area gross definition, where we said, okay, the accessory heating and ventilation and stairwells and elevator shafts, if we take that out of the calculation, that gives them all a little more square feet without really, tying us into 1,000 feet or something like that. So if that was the intent, and I think it was, then the new definition should really stop at equipment rooms. The total of all, because if we're making a net versus a gross, the gross area doesn't talk about parking, loading, first floor. Why do we have this other stuff in the net? And frankly, I just didn't notice it when we did the workshop, because I'm looking at it and it was all there when we talked about it, but.
And our floors below the first floor, is that a basement in plain language?
Yeah.
If you assume the first floor. And people convert their basements into things all the time and never permit any of it. There's lots of people who do get permits, and that's a good thing, but there are other folks who do not. And giving them a free pass on garages and floors below grade is really opening up for larger ADUs to be constructed and only caught when it's sold. But
I think we need to rework this. I'm not sure, looking at it, that it does what we intended. It's like it's like defining a whole different floor area.
The floor area gross definition does say, it's worded a little differently, but it says, or any floor space in accessory buildings or in main buildings intended and designed for the parking requirements. So I don't know if that's kind of like describing a garage. But it's not worded the same as the net one.
Yeah, we didn't look at the whole, I think we need to rework take another look at that.
I would only suggest that from what I've seen come before the ZBA, having some sort of a net is a useful thing, because when we look at it and you look at the 800 square foot limitation, there's a question that the ZBA members have discussed. Well, if it's 820, if it's a scooch over 800, do we grant it as a minor thing? But if it's 900, 950, 1,000, is that going excessively over the spirit of the ordinance? So I think giving them a little bit more play by having a net, taking the mechanical rooms and the other obviously unoccupiable spaces out is probably a worthwhile thing. As far as the things that Tim has talked about, yeah, people, I've seen so many of them, frankly, usually from the Pinardville area, where you get those kind of conversions all the time.
Because they have nowhere to go with the
Where
foundation.
where people come in but they want it blessed after the fact.
Why don't we, because we've sort of made this more complicated than it was intended, why don't we just go to our 521 accessory dwelling unit, where it says an accessory dwelling unit shall be clearly incidental, single family, and shall not occupy more than 800 square feet of gross floor area within the residence. Why don't we change it to occupy not more than 800 square feet of gross floor area, not including
Yeah.
accessory heating and ventilation equipment and
Stairwell,
elevator
yeah.
and stairwell shafts.
Joanne, that's already in the gross floor area definition, like Scott said, already excludes parking, and it excludes the accessory heating and ventilation equipment. So that's already excluded from the gross floor area.
It doesn't exclude like stairwells and, let's see, the sum there is including for you, not gonna see.
Elevator shafts.
So it's stairwells and elevator shafts are the
Yeah.
two pieces.
Yeah,
Barbara, do you know if the legislature is working on anything that's going to create a number that's a statute, like a
And
1,500 or a
accessory
2,000 or some kind of a number that is coming down the pike that's going to severely
I
affect? our-
I shudder to think with this
I'm just
new
asking
year, what's
if
gonna
you've
come
heard
down the
any
pike.
whispers.
No,
I
I
have-
have not,
I've
and I
been
tried, but they're
reading
making a
up on
whole
it.
new housing committee up there this year.
they're talking about mandating towns to have at least 1,000 square feet.
Right, I'm just
Yeah.
wondering if we are making a lot of work for an ordinance that's going to get, it's going to get a whipping in the legislature in the upcoming
Yeah,
years.
I think maybe given what's in the gross now, just leave it.
Leave it for now.
Sorry, Lynn.
Okay, but do you want to add a net definition for net? Which,
Maybe after we find out what the legislature does, we do it in the ensuing year.
okay.
But because
I
I
don't-
think if we're doing a net, then we need to look at the gross definition, given what Scott's pointed out as the definition, that we now have this gross calculation that doesn't include all
Okay.
this other stuff. Why?
Yeah, the last sentence, it says it shall include the horizontal area at each floor level devoted to stairwells and elevator shafts,
So
so,
it's
Yeah.
like directly contrary to what we're doing
Yeah.
for ADUs.
yeah, it's,
I'd suggest that we, like Tim saying, just X 2 and 3 for this year, see if the legislature is gonna be doing something with accessory dwelling units that's gonna be pushed down on all of us. But I would hope that our state reps would talk to us as, legislation is coming up, I'm sure they'll.
You can talk to them, and then they're gonna do exactly the opposite of what they tell you in your
They
face.
have yet to call our planning director on any housing issues.
Okay, so does anyone want to keep 2 and 3 alive at this point, or is everyone in?
Well, can I
Agree.
just,
Phil,
we
please?
just ask Glenn, by leaving it, does it make any issues? Are there issues?
No more than what we're facing now. If it's status quo, we'll still be doing that thing. Is it a little bit over? Is it a lot over in making the calculus? on
Let's fix
that
it once and
point?
fix it right, not fix it now and then fix it again a year from now.
Okay.
No, I don't see where it causes any additional problems or anything.
Thank you, Len. Thank you, Phil.
does every ADU have to go in front of the ZBA?
No, there's by right, ADUs are inside your house, or by right, aren't they?
Only detached.
Only
Detached
okay.
ADUs.
But we are getting more.
They go before the
requests for-
ZBA
They want
because they're
bigger.
more than
want
800,
more.
that's why he's
Yeah.
seeing.
Okay.
And then
But they're not
detached
allowed to
units.
exceed 800 even in a
Not allowed.
detached
Yeah.
ADU?
Correct, 800 is.
Well,
our-
detached, you've got to have the variance. You can't do a detached without a variance.
But does the 800 apply to that line?
Yes.
Okay, and then a variance could be for a larger ADU, that part of the variance process that you would receive
If,
for?
again, if.
Maybe
the
1,000 or even 1,200?
We haven't ever granted anything
2,000
that large. We had a,
Well, that number's in my brain for some reason, I don't know why that number's in
we
my-
had a messy situation that involved one that
All right.
went way over, like 1,200, and
Uh,
that was granted, so, not granted, shall we say.
All right, so
That
we,
had some other
is it the
weird
general
questions,
consensus of this board,
Didn't it? Yeah.
But,
is the general consensus of this board to eliminate 2 and 3? I'm gonna ask for anybody that would be opposed to that, that means everyone else is in favor of dispatching with them. No one's opposed, we move on, Colleen, number 4.
Okay, so 4, 5, and 6 are all related. This is a result of a change in legislation that, and Joanne or Barbara, correct me if I say this wrong, but that we cannot require site plan approval for a in-home daycare facility. It needs to be allowed by right. We can allow it by, we can require a conditional use permit, but we currently do not. But we cannot require site plan approval for an in-home daycare facility.
And that's got limitations? Or no limitations?
No, there are some
There are
limitations.
some.
If you go to your attachment of what at NHMA to page 6, HB 1567 was addressing it. They're trying to provide more options, make it easier for people to provide childcare because there's screening, there's some
I understand,
childcare.
but
There are wait
when-
lists at all of them.
But did they ever attach numbers? Is it like 5 or 6 children, or could it be 25?
Yeah, no, there's always
Yeah.
numbers in childcare.
Yes.
always.
Six
Yeah, it's all
full-time
regulated by the state.
preschool,
Okay,
3
So-
part-time school age.
I don't like blank checks.
So this creates then, or replaces, the family child care home and adds to our existing language that, this is a child care program operated in a home in which the provider resides. Family child care home, one provider may care for a maximum of 6 preschool children, plus up to 3 children enrolled in a full day school program. Number of children younger than 36 months of age and 24 months of age that may be cared for is limited. And so,
Really? Is this a statute?
that's the definition.
I mean,
9
one
kids.
provider for 6 preschool plus 3 children, and so I mean, one provider for 9 children, that's how it really is in the statute? Or is that those are our words?
No, that's in the statute.
Yeah, that was in the
That's
That's
a
the
lot.
statute.
Holy
Yeah.
Moses.
So that's the new definition.
Okay.
I'm glad that's not your job.
Good.
You imagine 9 kids.
I did when I worked at the highway department.
And then there's another new definition then for family group childcare. So the difference is adding the word group, family group childcare home. So this would be a childcare program operated in a home in which the provider resides. Family group childcare home, one provider and one family childcare worker or assistant may care for 7 to 12 preschool children, plus up to 5 children enrolled in a full day school program. Number of children younger than 36 months of age may be cared for is limited. So that is essentially allowing a second provider still in this in-home setting. And then associated with that would be adding a section 5.6.4, child daycare or group child care is defined in, and Joanne, I think we need to find that RSA reference because that needs to be updated. So those defined, those programs shall be allowed as an accessory use to any primary residential use under local zoning and planning regulations. Family or group family child care shall not be subject to site plan review in any zone where primary residential use is permitted. So
And that's state statute also, that wording right there is state law?
yes, Joanne, that came straight from the statute. Or, I think that we need to,
No kidding.
So Joanne, my one concern is that we say child daycare or group child care is defined in that RSA. That RSA doesn't have that definition, so I think we need to check that reference.
Okay.
And I tried to, and I think that if this is supposed to be establishing the home, I think we need to make it clear, because this is just saying family and group family child care programs. It doesn't say home, so I want to make clear that this isn't allowing daycare centers, this is these that meet the state mandated home definition. And I think that we can just allow them as an accessory use to any primary residential use. I don't think we need this under local zoning and planning regulations. The extra part of that sentence, I think, is unnecessary, but I've got concerns about this. I know if we need to allow it, and I get wanting to make sure that, you know, it provides additional opportunities for in-home childcare, and I just want to make sure that it's truly accessory to that residential use. It's an in-home, and that there's not going to open the door for childcare centers in a residential area that are not home-based.
Questions? So.
This law is already in effect.
Yeah.
So I think, Joanne, if I can just, to make it clear, I'm not, and maybe if you send it to me, I'll look at it, like, where, before you say replace, the reality is we're adding a definition of family child care home, based on what they call it on the statute. And then, but we're adding it, so we're not adding it to a current definition, are we?
It's actually replacing it.
Right, so I think you need to be more careful about what,
It says replace definition of terms.
right, but then it says add. So
The one we have now.
you're adding a definition for family child care home, and then if you go to the next page where it says omit at the top, you're omitting the definition for family daycare home. That's what you have your line crossed off. You're getting rid of family daycare home and replacing it with family child care home.
Right, it's just the terms of the
Right, but I
title.
think you need to, it's not clear the way this was written that you were basically taking out one definition and putting in a new definition.
Okay.
Same thing with family group child care. You're doing the same thing. We're deleting family group daycare. We're adding family group child care home.
You're right, Barbara.
Yeah.
It's not clear that the title is being changed.
Right, the whole thing is being
Okay.
replaced.
So this is all present state law, what we just read, this is all state law.
Right.
Now, when we look at any application for any type of non-residential use in a residential neighborhood, we always take into consideration things like vehicles coming and going and noise and different things like that.
You
And
just
the
said-
and the legislature didn't consider any of these things when they decided to make these broad laws that just open the door for someone to move in next to your house, my house, or your house, and have 10 screaming kids in the yard all summer long and disturb your peace and quiet at your house. It seems ridiculous,
Yeah, but I could
You
have
could
10
have
kids
19.
screaming kids at my house on my own.
but you don't.
I could. Well, not at my age, but
I
I
think the
could.
I think the legislature,
You could have 10 barking
So-
dogs,
I think
too.
the legislature is faulted when they
This-
allow, it's just for profit. Those could be your own kids,
This does.
or your neighbor's kids, but these are people that are doing this for a business.
We are able to, we don't have to allow them by right, we can allow them by conditional use
It
permit.
says right in there, any prime, under local zoning and planning
Yeah.
regulations.
Well, that's how it's
May
written right now.
not, shall not be subject to site plan review in any zone where a primary residential use is permitted.
But it says that we can choose to regulate home-based childcare via conditional use permit. We just need to be careful. So it's not, in what we have drafted as the language, we're saying we're allowing it by right. The change in the legislation does allow us to permit them by conditional use permit.
Okay.
We would need to change our use table and let it be by conditional use permit, come up with criteria for it. And it just says we need to be careful that we're not using that to
Stop people from doing
to
it.
stop people or to, essentially require them to go through a site plan process without a site plan.
So if
We
we're
can't do
gonna, if
that.
we're gonna adopt this as our zoning wording, without the conditional use permit criteria in hand, we're putting the horse before the cart.
Well, right now, correct me, Joanne, right now, daycares are allowed as an accessory use in residential districts.
Yes, and in group child daycare centers, in the agricultural, RSBO 1 and 2, need a conditional use permit. They're permitted in the village commercial, and the CIFC district
Right.
by
I just wanted to
right.
bring that up.
Yeah.
I just always find it bad and things sometimes. Okay, anybody have any questions about what's been presented here for 4, 5, and 6?
Can I just add something to that?
Please, Joanne?
Daycare, so we have a few different things here. We have daycare home,
What, you're looking at the table of uses?
yes. Family daycare home, that's 6 plus 3. And then the family group daycare home, which is 12 plus 5, number of children. And most, the daycare home is permitted in everywhere except CIFZ and industrial.
You keep using the word daycare. It says family group child care.
I know, but in our ordinance, it's called daycare. That's what we're changing.
Well,
That's
it
one of
needs,
the
and
things.
we need to have, the titles need to follow in our definitions what's in our table so people can transition the exact word to the exact word then.
Yeah, so I guess
Well-
the table needs to be updated
I
then?
think the
Yeah,
table
table
needs to be
needs to be
updated, yeah. So daycare home is permitted everywhere but CIFZ and industrial. Family daycare home, which is the 6 plus the 3 children, are permitted in conservation, agricultural, R1, R2, RSBO 1 is CU, conditional use, and RSBO 2 is a conditional use. And then the family group daycare, which is the 12 kids plus the 5, is conditional use in agricultural, R1, R2, and RSBO 1. And in every other zone, they're not permitted. So the larger they go, the more, or I should say the less zones that are permitted in by right.
Right. Anybody else have anything for Joanne or Colleen at this point?
So on the table of accessory uses, and I would view this as an administrative change, you would have to change accessory to principal use number 3. You would need to change that from family daycare home to family child care home. And you would need to change 4, family group daycare home to family group child care home. And I would view that as being an administrative change for the zoning once the definitions are changed. But that has to get changed or people will lose their mind.
Well, they'll go to look up family group child care home. They won't find it in the
Right.
table of uses.
Yeah,
And that'll be a
it'll
problem.
be a nightmare. Yeah.
Anybody else?
Now we get to Tim's really.
Here we go.
Oh, Tim's gonna like this one.
1.5. Where's the half card?
So number
So
7,
ambiguous.
this is again a change based on, I don't know which.
It's on the handout. It's
Page
at the
4,
end.
Bottom of page 4.
Yeah.
HB
1400,
1400.
yeah.
So 1400 had a few different changes. One of the changes that required is that local regulations cannot require more than 1.5 residential parking spaces per unit for studio and one-bedroom units under 1,000 square feet, meet the requirements for workforce housing, and that local regulations cannot require more than 1.5 residential spaces per unit for any multifamily development of 10 units or more. So this would be adding clarification, because right now we require 2 spaces per unit. So this would be adding it, and specifically for those 2 types of housing where the legislature has said we can only require 1.5, adding
So,
those 2.
If I may ask,
types.
what did the legislature do? Make it 1 only, effectively?
I don't know.
It seems to
The
me.
crazy stuff happened after I left.
I'm not-
We
I'm just
made
looking
it
at
one
you.
and a half.
I'm just looking at you,
Yeah,
because you
they-
generally have the legislative answer.
They
But the-
made it 1.5, and so if you add up however many units there are over 10, they need over 10 to qualify for the 1.5, and then you would add them all up as far as how many units there were, and then if it was, the end result was, I don't know, say
10 units is
20.5.
It was
then
21.
Yeah,
It would
and
be
you'd round
21 that they
yeah.
would need.
And
And there's no mention anywhere of guest parking, which
so,
It's weird.
my
Well-
suggestion, and if the legislature has decided that this is what we have to do, then that's what we have to do. But I think that we need to add, because it's come up on other projects before, we need to add some sort of minimum requirement for guest parking. So that and I think for any multifamily development or development over a certain size, and I don't know, Scott or Joanne, if there's any like ITE kind of standard, or, how many, if it's like 1 space per 4 units or something, or, and to a maximum number. But I think that we need to have a standard so that if we have a 20-unit, multifamily housing project come in here, we can say, okay, 1.5 per unit, plus we have this requirement for guest parking spaces that's, so I don't know what the right number is, but I think that if we're doing this because we have to, then I think that we also need to set, and it gives us something too, because I know we've had some of these projects come in, and we've asked for guest parking spaces, and they've generously given us guest parking spaces, but it should be a requirement.
Yeah.
So, I don't know what the number is, but I think we
Yeah.
should have another thing, yeah.
Well, we clearly had an issue with the recent development that has
Yes.
guest parking issues, or just parking issues in general, so.
So, when it comes to state law, we talk about our 100-foot wet conservation, or wetland districts. 50 feet is the state standard, correct, for wetland setback?
I think so.
And we increased it to 100 feet because you're allowed to make your regulations more strict than state law, but not less strict than state law. So does that apply to the parking here? Could we require 2 spaces because we're making it more strict than state law as opposed to less than state law? Does that apply, that argument, in this case?
No.
Because?
There is a push at the legislature.
I don't care what, I'm talking about,
I don't think you can, Tim.
It
I don't
says-
think you can.
well then how come we were able to do it with this wetland
Well,
setback?
this specifically says local regulations cannot require more than 1.5.
And I think
So-
that
so
when
they
they
wrote-
local
so they
They
wrote
wrote
it
that way
in.
intentionally, they wrote it in there, so that way we can't.
Okay. I'm just-
And
It's frustrating, but.
I agree. I'm just trying to find the workarounds, if there are any
well,
workarounds.
it's like prime wetlands. If you vote for the prime, you can do other things. You can vote to, local regulations can increase it. But, that has this particular agenda behind it, and they can get that through, and this is a different agenda, so.
Thank you.
And
What are
then
we gonna
there's-
do when we
there's
have a bunch of cars
other-
that don't have parking spots?
Well, didn't
Make
Manchester,
more streets, darn it.
didn't
Send them to
Manchester,
Concord, I
didn't
guess.
Manchester just adopt some changes to their
Yeah, they
parking
just
requirements?
approved a big
No,
parking
no
thing.
parking requirements at all for some of these new apartments they put in.
It's insane.
What are we gonna
where
do?
they're gonna go.
DPW is gonna have to widen the streets, I guess, make off-street parking
You
on the
can't park
streets.
on the streets in
Or
snow
or
emergencies,
take out a few bumpers and snow plowing.
This,
That's one of
this
the
same
problems with
stat,
on-street parking.
this same statute talks about if they come in with a parking plan that's different from what's required.
Well, that's
Yeah,
the alternative
we've got-
parking, let's
yeah,
not
we've got
mix
enough.
apples and
Okay.
oranges.
No, we already been down that alternative parking road.
Well, we're gonna go down it again, so.
Next week.
Joanne, can I ask then, like, I get, if this is what we have to do, we have to do it, but can we add either to the table or add it as another item
Yeah.
that, and I would guess, ask you and Scott to kind of look at what is the right number for guest parking spaces?
Yeah,
per unit?
we don't have a copy of
You mean
the
the actual
ITE.
physical dimensions of a parking?
No, like the number, like how many, if there's a 20-unit development, you know, how many spaces per unit for guests would be the right number of parking?
Yeah, the town doesn't have a copy of the ITE, but we
Okay.
can reach out to, I don't know, one of our consultants to see if they can just,
Yeah.
The
Give us
other
a-
thing
it's
that
an
you
expensive
might wanna
document that we wouldn't use
consider,
much, so.
rather than guest parking, is whether or not, and we have done this, require area for loading zones.
We have done that. We did it last year.
I know.
Oh.
Have put it in.
Except that loading zones are not parking
Yeah.
spots.
Okay,
Yeah.
but I need to tell you, I think that when you have a statute that says you may not require more parking per unit, and then you add something that says, but you have to have guest parking per unit, the Housing Appeals Board would probably find that that violates the statute. However, a parking zone, which would,
Loading
a
zone.
loading zone,
Which are generally posted, no parking.
whatever, Tim, it would provide more
I see-
space,
I see your
because with
workaround.
your parking,
So if
think
there's
we-
no parking,
I
then they
think
can
we have
restripe it
that
after the
already.
fact.
Pardon me?
I think we already did that last year.
strangled somebody
But
at
it was
each
like-
one of
it was
these
like a loading
meetings,
space.
at
It was
like
least
one loading
once,
space
Yeah, it was
or
just
something.
one.
every
Yeah.
meeting.
Just throw something at me.
What are you thinking of,
That's a
John?
good
Loading?
point.
They tried to have,
Barbara
we
about
tried to have a
the appeals
loading
board.
zone
I hadn't
at the
even
latest
thought.
approval
Oh,
down at
so
one,
it's-
at
yeah.
the Montague
Yeah.
project,
Yeah.
at 114.
And we already have one loading space in our.
There is one in that
ordinance.
project?
It's in our ordinance,
Oh,
yes,
I'm
so
just
they
saying.
had to do
That's
it.
fine. I thought you meant where it was applied to a project.
I know we don't like to spend money on the town attorney reviewing or giving an opinion, but it would be good to know if we did require guest parking, if that is something that would get us in trouble.
I think we can tell you what the opinion's gonna be, Colleen.
I
If it's
mean,
controversial, it's gonna be, don't do it.
I think it's controversial not having enough parking spaces for people visiting your,
But it specifically says, no more
You
parking.
can't go there, and, yeah.
You want to call it something else, but it's parking.
yeah.
That's the way they're gonna look at it.
Then we don't require curbing so they can all drive on their lawns. It's all good. DPW loses out on curbing, because then parking becomes front lawns, and it'll be great.
Well, we'll just have a 10-foot setback for mailboxes, and DPW won't care. They
We
can
could
just plow
require
wherever.
10-foot gravel shoulders, Scott.
Moving right along.
Yeah, so much for my, this was gonna be an
So
early
that's-
meeting.
Well, we're gonna go faster now.
All right.
So we're gonna forward the section 725 table off-street parking. Everybody's okay with that and being inserted in?
We need
No
to.
problem?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm
Move
not,
on.
so we're not looking into the guest parking
At this
after all?
time, Colleen is probably gonna get an opinion from someone else. Maybe we can find if someone else has already done it in their
Okay.
regulations, and we can pick, copy and paste it.
I can look into that.
Yeah,
See if
because then
anybody
you
else
would
has gotten in
have
trouble yet.
guest
Has anyone been
handicap
challenged?
parking.
Yes.
There you go.
All right, so our next
Yeah, with
one,
multifamily, you need at least, a specific amount of ADA spaces too, right?
yeah,
So then that gets tricky too,
Is that
because
included
Yeah.
in that parking calculation?
it's included
Or
in
is
the
that
total
outside of
calc.
It should be included, but it doesn't mention it.
Well, if it doesn't mention it, then it's outside of the,
There is
Yeah.
another section here about handicap accessible, but that's just for the size of the spaces, which
Okay.
is your request.
Oh, yeah, because it's shorter than the other parking
Yeah.
spaces. Because we changed the length of the parking spaces last year and forgot to include updating the length of the handicap spots.
so that's.
Which is number 8.
That's our next number 8 then is just updating that, the description, the sizing of the accessible spaces, to change it from 18 and a half feet to 20 feet in length.
Any
So,
discussion on that? Okay, next.
all right.
Just
Next,
so everyone knows, everybody that went through this year, they made their ADA spaces the same depth as the rest of them, so.
it would have been a little weird if they had
I don't know
something.
Abel's number, because I've never built anything less than a 9-foot parking.
Yeah.
Well, so the way that actual ADA law is written is with the ramp space, you need 16 feet, so you do 8 and 8.
Colleen, please,
So
9.
number 9 is, again, from that HB 1400, alternative parking requirements. And Joanne, I'll read this as you have it here, but I think we can change this a little bit and still be in compliance. But the intent of the bill was to require that planning boards shall consider if an applicant proposes an alternative parking arrangement. So this would say if a proposed residential use proposes to meet on-site parking requirements prescribed by a local ordinance or regulation with an alternate parking solution due to economic considerations, the planning board shall be required to consider the alternative parking solution. The phrase alternative parking solution is defined by the statute to mean a proposal by an applicant to meet the parking demand created by a proposed residential use as a substitute for meeting the on-site parking requirements. And so that's on page 4 of the handout.
Is the key word in there consider, not approve?
Exactly, so I think shall consider. And so I do think, Joanne, maybe we need a little bit of wordsmithing on this, but I do think we need to say that an applicant, so maybe change our regulation to say that an applicant may present an alternative parking solution to the planning board, for consideration by the planning board, something like that, because we need to consider it, but we don't have to approve it. I think that's the only thing that gives us some flexibility.
When we've given out alternate parking arrangements, which we have, is there anything that we need to make it so it's actually enforceable? I mean, do we have to get signed documents that put into the record?
I think if it's going on private property, you likely would have to. If they're using public parking, probably.
No, we had an applicant that, for a church that didn't have enough space, and they made a deal with some of the neighboring businesses to use their parking lots. But it was only a verbal presentation to the planning board at the time that I remember, and I don't remember ever getting anything in writing from the alternative parking receiver.
I 100% think that if we are approving a parking waiver essentially, or an alternative arrangement, because they're gonna rely on an abutting site, we should absolutely require an easement be recorded that gives the rights to that user for the parking arrangement. I think that just, without anything legally binding and recorded, there's
Yeah, the
just-
second the person moves, they're
yeah,
like, no,
they-
you can't park in my
Yeah,
yard.
you get a new you sell
So
property.
does
and
that have to be
just-
included in this section about alternative, that written agreements must be recorded with the documents? Is that required to be in the language to fully explain to someone who wants to use an alternative parking that they will be required to provide written documentation?
I think you just stick to what we have to do, and you can do that anyways. I mean, we do that all
we
the
can
time.
require. Because an alternative parking arrangement could also be something like, we had a conceptual plan in that was talking about they weren't gonna meet the parking for, was it a retail use? But they have similar stores at other locations, and they could say, hey, look, on a busy Saturday, we only ever need, 20 parking spaces based on this same business, operating other places.
And
So
me
it's not
being a
always-
complete pessimist, don't believe
Yeah.
a word out of anybody's mouth.
That specific
Yeah.
one actually
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
drew, like we could
I
add
felt that
parking
once
here if we
Yeah,
had to.
yeah,
So
have
that
that
was a-
reserved for future, yeah.
All right,
Now, I have one question on that. So we have an application that's coming back to you next meeting, and
okay.
they want to do the shared parking, but the same person owns each lot. And I was always told that you can't grant an easement to yourself.
Darn, good point.
Yeah, we need to look at that. You're right.
We
you
brought it
can't-
up in-
can't
I
use
don't,
easement.
I don't know that the easement is for the purposes of a different lot, though.
Right.
The easement
I don't think we
recording-
should discuss this
Yeah.
application.
But I just
tonight.
think for easements, I think that there might be a distinction to it when you're talking about two different lots as compared to,
I was always
It might
told
not be
this-
an easement, maybe it's gonna be a
Agreement.
cross-access
I'm
agreement.
gonna stop
Yeah,
this
sorry.
discussion right now. We are,
Sorry.
we are doing what we're not supposed to do. We're talking about an application that's coming up before it's here, so we're not gonna talk about this. We'll get in trouble. So if we can't talk about alternate parking requirements till after that applicant comes and goes, we'll do this at another meeting then. But I don't wanna bring that
Yeah.
into the discussion. It's not germane.
So,
Alright.
I don't have any other, I think,
Anybody
Joanne,
else?
we can simplify that a little bit on the,
Okay.
Anybody else
do
on
we
number
need
9?
to add alternative parking arrangement as a definition?
Probably yes.
did they define it? Did the legislature define it? Yeah, they did, so,
I think they did.
okay.
So then we do need to add it as a definition. You have a note on that, Joanne?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, number 10, please, Colleen.
Okay, number 10, illumination of parking areas. The current language is presented there, where we, illuminating parking areas shall direct the light away from adjacent properties. There's the maximum of 0.2-foot candles, except where parking lots are interconnected. We'd be adding the additional language that all lighting fixtures shall have full cutoff shields.
Now, don't we already have the night sky regulations that requires cutoff shields?
I thought we
looked.
did.
I couldn't
I
find
thought
it.
we require full cutoff.
Is that in the development
Oh.
regs?
We do in the development regs require full cutoff, but not night sky requirements.
Well, don't they achieve the same end? Isn't
But
that
we're
what
just
a full
inserting
cutoff
full
does?
cutoff, we're not using night sky compliant here, we're saying full cutoff.
The night sky is much more complicated, and we don't even have a light meter.
Joanne, can you, so I think when we talked about this, the reasoning behind this was not necessarily related to things coming in for site plan approval. It seemed to be that there was a concern with existing
Right.
illumination.
Well, I like the idea of putting it in there because then avoids us having to have a discussion about what night sky lighting is. This is a mechanical fix
Right.
to the night sky discussion. And if it requires full cutoff shields, then it takes the discussion off the board, and we don't have to talk about it at the meeting. So I like that being in there, actually.
So we're dealing with an abutter to an existing site right now that has a light complaint. And looking at the regulations, we don't require measurement of light at the front of the parcel. Should we think about changing that? Like the way it reads is you measure
Side and rear.
Side and rear lot line.
side and rear lot lines. So why does the person across your frontage have to,
I think there should be all lot lines.
that's kind of what I was getting at is,
Yeah,
Should remove side and rear and
as
replace it
measured
with
at
all
the
lot lines.
Yeah.
Very good, Scott. Now, we also have required lighting plans which show where the light is going to be directed. So does that comply with this section then, Colleen? When we get a lighting plan for an applicant? They show where how much light is going to be in all the spot locations?
Well, that's part of
Yeah.
the development regs. and that's-
yeah. And as long as, I guess, just making sure that this doesn't conflict with the language in the development regs, if this is, I know it's a little bit different.
You
as
know,
long
the
as it's
other
not.
thing is that this is under outdoor lighting. So, do we want, there is a light projection provision and there is an illumination of parking areas. And what my notes indicate is that we were going to, why were we distinguishing parking areas? It's really an issue for illumination,
Outdoor lighting.
outdoor
In general.
lighting. So we were going to take 8.5 and basically merge it, this is what my notes have, with
That makes sense.
8.3, so that the measurement for side lot lines, blah, 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 would apply to all lighting on a site.
Well, that's a good broad brush stroke then. I like that.
Yeah,
Because that could include any type of light, whether they're building lights that are lighting the sidewalks up or any kind of
I
light.
mean, if you've got, I mean, I've got, a lot of people have these lights that are on all night now. I mean, I get shadows in my house. I don't really have any close neighbors, but I can get shadows in my house from lights on at a budding property because it's just so strong.
So is it simply the title, section 8.5, that you would like to revise the title?
no.
To say something different?
No, 8.5 needs to go away, and 8.3 needs to be, you know,
So-
light projection, and it needs to be merged as to the requirement with
So
the
you-
measurement at the lot line.
And using the current language portion of this, in this
Right.
area here, just eliminate 8.5 illumination.
And
So
then,
we should eliminate
and
8.6.
8.6,
Yeah.
we just said should just be,
Because 8.5 was parking areas, 8.6 was loading areas,
Which is
so-
funny, because 8.6 just says measured at the lot lines, it doesn't say
Yeah.
side and
Yeah.
rear.
right, so by putting
You
it all
got it right on
together,
that one.
so we consolidated.
This is why we're doing this stuff, because it's all a mixture of
Yeah.
inconsistencies.
So number 10 on your sheet, we need to end up with 8.3 and merge 8.5 and 8.6 into it. Or you can make it 8.6, I mean, I don't care what number it ends up being, but there's no reason for
Yep,
us to be having different standards
No.
for illumination and light projection on what the property.
particular area is,
Right.
no, it's not necessary. Okay. We're gonna work on that some more, Colleen?
Yep.
With your committee? Okay, what about 11?
So 11 is, and the general gist of the HB 1361 requires that municipalities allow manufactured homes and manufactured home parks. Joanne, I know you said, you wrote in here that this is like a entire rewrite of section 9. I think that when we looked at it and talked about it, really the intent of what we need to allow here is that if somebody on an existing lot of record, or if somebody's subdividing and creating a lot, we can't restrict and tell them that they cannot put a manufactured home on that lot. So we need to wordsmith some of our language in here. I think that,
I have the ones that you wanted to eliminate and then
Okay.
the ones that you wanted to keep.
okay. So you've got, so I don't know what, and I had
I'd like this one.
some notes, but I think that the rewrite is basically going to be changing so that a manufactured home can be allowed on, because I think right now we have language that manufactured home is only allowed in a manufactured home park.
Right.
And we can't restrict that.
Right.
No.
So we'd be cleaning that up. And then there are some references in here to a manufactured home once voluntarily removed, shall not be returned to the site. Well, we can't,
That sounds like a moot point,
not-
because I can tell you right where a
Yeah.
manufactured home is in town here that
yeah.
we're over there.
So Joanne, are you writing up those changes that we had talked about
Yeah.
and we'll have?
I will.
But that's what this changes, basically, and it's intended to allow reasonable and realistic opportunities for expansion of manufactured housing parks.
Good.
So,
Okay, and if I can
Len?
yeah.
raise
Len,
my
you
hand
had
on
something.
that, let me preface this, taking off my ZBA hat, and I'm speaking as an individual on this. I moved to the other side of town about 6 years ago. I am in the only manufactured housing community in town over in Medville, and I've been kind of active in the manufactured housing. It's the cheapest form of unsubsidized housing that we have, and I think it's really important. I think this is one of the good changes that came out of the legislature Or because say by being able to put a manufactured house, you put in the water, you put in the septic, the construction standards that for manufactured housing in 2024 are pretty much exactly what they are for stick-built houses. Oh, there's no reason to discriminate them. I believe there's a law pending somewhere, maybe on the federal level, that says you don't have to put a chassis under them anymore, which is the distinction that was made
Right.
with mobile home versus modular type homes. I just think it's a good change. It's something that, the town should encourage more of. I know that I'm also an officer of the Medville Cooperative. I know that they've got land that they've got over there, but frankly, I don't see that getting developed anytime within the next century because of the development cost of it. The co-op just doesn't have that kind of money to do it. But again, it's the kind of thing, not confining manufactured housing to parks is a very good move.
All right, but just so, for purposes of planning and figuring out what we're doing, because when is our first zoning hearing?
December 5th, I think.
Yeah,
Okay,
Patty
so it's
needs to
coming up.
post it next week.
So, if section 9 in your zoning ordinance is manufactured homes and manufactured home parks, I just want to make sure that if we get, like Joanne says, it needs a rewrite. There, I have marked 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 changes on the page, what's 90, I have an older one. So, we need to sort of give Joanne a priority for that, because we were going to eliminate, do you have it? Section 9.1. We were gonna leave the rest of, we sort of left the
Yeah.
rest of it, but 9111 needs to go. That needs to come out.
Yeah, that's
And-
the one that limits where you can.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one just needs to say delete. And then 9113, I am sure that the Construction Standard Act, Len, maybe you can look this up and send it to Joanne. I am sure there was an update since 74.
I think it's whatever the current set of building codes that the building inspector goes by.
Yeah, but there's
Same.
there clearly is a national mobile home
construction
construction safety standard. They're not gonna give up, nobody gives up a law on their own.
They change
Yeah, it may not be even named the same thing anymore, but I know it's been updated
Yeah, but
since
it's still not the most
1974.
recent.
But I don't even know if we can have that provision anymore.
Yeah, manufacture within 5 years of their placement in town of Goffstown. I don't think that we can limit.
So I think 9113 needs to
Yeah.
come out. And
Is that like
then,
so you don't take one from another location?
So you don't take something that's very old,
Yeah.
but if you want to take and relocate that,
That's your
Ty-
right.
Typically, with my experience with Medville, any manufactured home that's been on site any longer than 5 years, you're not gonna be able to move anyway.
they move them. I'll tell you, they move them.
Both for reasons of logistics and for reasons of expense. They rarely get moved if they're on site for more than a couple of years.
so, yeah, I think 9113 likely just delete, but maybe check with Jack and see if there's any reason for keeping a reference to whatever that safety standard is.
And then 91141, we were talking about moving. What we said, if people want to move it and return it, like somebody might want to move it, put in a foundation and move it back. We talked about changing shall not be, saying if returned to the site, needs to comply with this current zoning regs, right? So if you have an old one, okay, but if you're gonna move a new one on, it needs to comply with whatever the current regs are.
I think all current codes require they've gotta be put on a slab.
All right, so, but that's whatever the codes are. 91142 needs to come out. And then 9115 we were deleting the words "or exhibited." We just said, "No home shall be stored for sale and eventual removal." And then we decided the rest of the statute was, standard for the park. So if you can get to that,
Before you print a copy for the public hearing, you mean?
yeah, I mean, there's gotta be priorities, so that, I just wanted to run through that real quick. And I can leave my copy here if you want it.
Any questions on manufactured home or manufactured home parks at this time from board members? Okay, Colleen?
All right, number 12 is defining or clarifying the, who can appeal a decision. So is this all new language?
Yeah.
Joanne?
Well, if it's all new language and it's by the state of New Hampshire, we don't,
There's one section where it's crossed out, any person aggrieved.
Okay.
That's the old language, that's part of the
So
old.
appeals to the Board of Adjustment concerning any matter within the board's powers may be taken by the applicant and a butter or by any officer, department, or bureau of the municipality affected by a decision of the administrative officer. So it gets rid of that person aggrieved and I guess better defines what a person aggrieved is. And then it just further goes on to talk about the appeal within a reasonable time frame in accordance with the rules of the board. So is that a change, Joanne, from previously? It was 30 days?
Yes.
And so now it's no longer 30 days, it's just a reasonable time frame?
No, it's still 30 days if you look at the next section.
Okay. So the next section is the rehearing.
Right.
Within 30 days,
yep, that's
you
always
can
been.
appeal the decision. So Joanne, these are both, should,
So it takes out the part where any party to the action can appeal,
yep,
and it replaces it with the language of like abutters.
okay. Do these two, 12 and 13, need to be linked together or they can be standalone?
Well, they're two different subjects. One's the
Two different
rehearing
subjects.
and one's the appeal
Yeah.
process.
Okay.
And they're different.
They should be
It makes
separate.
sense
Okay.
that they're
Keep
separate.
them
All
separate.
right, just a question. The
Bill?
30 days, is the 30 days defined by statute, the way you count the 30 days?
Yes.
Okay. So we don't have to deal with that, that can
No.
remain, okay. Just making sure. I thought it was, but.
Does anyone have any other questions or anything on?
I think if it's,
Well,
if the legislature wrote these sections and if they codified them in law, then we should just copy and paste our statement from the legislature. Okay, the last one then is,
The last one is number 14, my favorite.
along with mine.
Right.
At this point, we would be recommending eliminating section 13.5 of the zoning ordinance, which allows open space developments. I think that there's a valid reason for having open space developments and allowing them, and I think though that the way that our ordinance is written, it's better to delete it, get it off the books, and then if we want to look at going back and coming up with some different language, new language on open space or cluster zoning, but I think that right now, it's not working to preserve open space the way that we would want to see, and
I think the problem with our ordinance is we don't have clear definitions of what the open space use is.
yeah,
It's just sort of this, it's back there, it's for passive recreation. The homeowners association has the right to log the property if they choose to. There's different words that are in these open space documents, and they all conflict with each other.
And I think there was a different at the time it was adopted, there was a specific reasons for it that they were trying to adjust, and I think we've gone beyond that.
The other thing is that our provision, if we were to adopt an open space development, I think we would review other provisions from other communities, and you will find in other open space regs much more specific methodology to the calculation as to the developable area, much more specific requirements as to verification of the calculation. You would also find requirements for financial feasibility to establish that you could have developed it in accordance with the zoning regs without going to open space. So to modify this you really would need to start from scratch. This would affect anything coming in the future. And I think we've seen that the land that is coming in for the development under this provision is substantially different and in
Right.
different locations than they were when this first started. So
Exactly.
it's not necessarily a permanent deletion, but as it stands now, it's not doing the town any benefit, I don't think. And I don't think it has for a while. So,
Okay, any questions on the open space development discussion? Okay, folks, does anybody have something else they would like to present to Joanne or to the board at the end of this list of,
Oh, I have two other things.
please, Joanne?
Let me just find it. Section 4.3. Which is the table of dimensional requirements. If you look at footnote 2, it says, reduce residential density for mixed-use properties, and then it gives you the calculation or the way to calculate what the density will be. So if you look down under where is it? Multifamily, if you look at the 1, 2, 3, 4, the fifth column where it says maximum number of dwelling units per buildable acre, and you go down to commercial, it says 15 dwelling units are permitted per buildable acre, and we don't allow we don't allow residential in the commercial. So I don't know why that's there. I checked back to zoning ordinance since before I came, and it was still in there, so I don't know where it came from.
Well, it's funny because commercial industrial flex doesn't have a count, and housing is allowed, or units are allowed there if it's mixed use, right?
They took that
Did we
out
not take that out?
Oh, did it get
last
taken out?
year?
last year
Oh, okay.
because what was happening was
Yeah,
people were just doing the residential
Yeah.
and not the multi-mixed use.
okay.
So this whole thing doesn't make any sense. There's a footnote, reduce residential density for mixed-use properties. But then you go up to the commercial where supposedly the mixed use is allowed, and it says 15 dwelling units. So this table also gives a density for like a straight multifamily in the commercial, which is 15 units per acre, but the table doesn't allow multifamily in the commercial. It is allowed as part of a mixed use only, but I don't know if you want it to be the 15 that it states. It says here, duplex and multifamily, where is it? There's a section in here where it says mixed use is allowed.
what is your proposal, Joanne?
Well, I just think we should fix this somehow where,
Well, I think since we allow mixed use, right? So we need a number to start at to
Right.
reduce. So you put the 15 dwelling units in there, and then you come down to the reduce footnote, and 15 dwelling units per acre is reduced to 10 dwelling units per acre. So, don't we kind of need that there to make that calculation for the
Yeah.
mixed use?
Because otherwise, I mean, it's clear on page 30 on the base districts and the use tables that in the commercial, and by conditional use permit, you can have mixed use multifamily, so you need to have a number, but I agree, like, if somebody looked at this though, it gives the impression on page 44 that, okay, commercial, you can have 15 dwelling units, but
Should-
it's not permitted. There almost
Should
needs to
we
be
add
an
another
asterisk
footnote?
there
Or,
to
yeah.
like clarify that it's not,
It's for the calculation of the mixed use only?
yeah, that might be. I understand why it seems confusing, I don't know what the right way of fixing it is, but maybe just an
Yeah.
extra footnote.
Or maybe just a footnote and say for mixed use only.
Yeah, with, like Colleen said, an asterisk or a new footnote number. Like add footnote 4 and have it in that column.
Okay.
Well, but isn't that what 2 does for the entire column?
Yeah, but it tells you, you reduce from the number that's in that column. So like, on commercial in that column is 15, so 15 dwelling units per acre is reduced to 10
10.
dwelling units per acre. So if we didn't have a number in that column at all, we wouldn't know what to reduce it to, or what you could even have for mixed use.
But I guess my point is, why do we need a further footnote? Because,
Why
Just
don't we
saying
put the
that-
footnote 2 there?
well, it doesn't, isn't the 2 for the entire column? That's why it's where it is. It's just that we've got 3, 7, and 8, and as I'm looking at it, the 7 and 8 are on the next page. So that's why, so maybe you do need to put the 2 in each category. Do you see what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Is like 2 is like for everything, and then you've inserted 3, 7, 8.
Yeah, I think what Joanne and Colleen are concerned with is just that, having that plain 15 dwelling units in that column, like.
So I think you
confuse people.
need to add the 2, I think it's just a format thing. I think the 2, rather than having it at the top, you lose it up there.
Right.
So it just needs to be inserted in each category, so some might have 2, 8 and 2. So like for high-density residential, you know, if 2, reduce residential from mixed use, so that would go high, you would put it in every category you could have mixed use. So agricultural, I mean, where do we have mixed? Arguably, you could have mixed use in. I don't
Yeah,
know.
I think either having the 2 and carrying it through, or that specific to commercial, it gets a different footnote that, you know, that multifamily dwelling is not permitted in commercial except as part of mixed-use development, in which case the density is 10 units per acre, because it's not being reduced from 15, the 15's not a real number.
Yeah, maybe that's the way to go.
Yeah,
So-
I think that's the way to go.
I think, I don't know that rises to the level of a zoning amendment, or if that's just more of a clarification.
I think that's just, I don't think we need to do that as a zoning amendment. I think you can, we're not changing what the rule is, we're just making the table make sense.
So just do it as part of the
Yeah.
change when I retype it.
Yeah.
Okay. And then if you go to 4.4.3, at the bottom of, at my page 45, I don't know if we're all on the same page. It says minimum unit size for conversions to duplex or multifamily units. And then under it, it says the minimum dwelling unit size is 800 square feet in the event that an existing residential structure is converted to a multifamily structure, or if already converted, additional dwellings are added. So to me, when I read that, it says the minimum dwelling unit size is 800 in the event that an existing residential structure is converted to a multifamily. So that's 3 or more is multifamily. But it doesn't mention anything about converting a single family to a 2-family, even though it's titled conversion to duplex. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, so instead of 800 square feet, existing residential structures converted to a duplex or multifamily is what you're wanting it to be.
Right.
So is this, say, like, if I have a 1,600 square foot house then, and I want to convert it to 2 800 square foot units, I can. It's just making sure that I'm not dividing it up into units any smaller than that.
What's the problem with making smaller units?
Yeah.
What's the problem with having smaller units?
It has something to do with the building code.
Oh.
But the way this is worded to me, it doesn't address a single family to a 2-family, although the title of it says 2 duplex, conversion to duplex.
Well, I think what Colleen is just saying, add duplex to 4431.
Yeah, so is converted to a insert duplex
Or
multifamily.
multifamily. Okay. All
Is
right.
that one just a clarification too, you think, or?
Yeah, I would just say that's a clarification.
That's administrative, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because if somebody came in with a duplex, they'd make a ruling that that applied.
Joanne, your discussion section 4.4, multifamily. Multifamily definition is 3 or more dwelling units.
Right. Multifamily is 3 or more.
Okay.
But that, the title of that paragraph is duplex multifamily, so it's sort of a,
Add a word and fix it.
Okay. I think that's all I have.
well, or do we want to get rid of the duplex in 443 to David's point?
Yes,
Yeah,
and
it should only
That's
apply
why,
multifamily.
that's why I brought it up. It's confusing to talk about duplexes when
They're not
the
classified
subject is
as,
multifamily.
it's not actually multifamily.
So the real solution is the paragraph heading for 443, duplex should be eliminated.
Okay.
That's,
Yeah, that's confusing.
the choice is
So do we
add or
have-
delete,
Do
always
we have a
delete.
regulation on how small you can make half a duplex then?
You could have a really tiny duplex.
Yeah, those are tiny houses.
I would just point out that we had some discussion regarding the setbacks in 4.3, and they don't make a lot of sense. So at some point, they need to be dealt with.
Oh, is that half the length of the entire building?
Oh,
I think we
yeah.
got rid of that, didn't we?
We got rid of that.
But
No,
we
this
still
is just
have-
like it's 10 here and 25
I-
here, and it doesn't.
I don't know, we didn't get rid of that. It's still in there.
It is?
What Colleen
like-
was talking about.
The orientation of the building to the street or
Right.
to the,
Yeah, where is that now? I can't remember. So I think it's under multifamily, actually. Yes, it's 4.4.1.3, on the same page we were just at.
yeah, the building side most parallel.
I'd like to just eliminate that whole thing.
Yeah, we just had a TRC for a multifamily that they wanted, that a developer wants to do, and it makes their setback 66 feet, and it makes their lot unbuildable because the setbacks
Are we
overlap
gonna
each
hear, are we
other.
gonna hear this application?
The current one that they presented
Well,
would
let's not
need
discuss it.
so many
Let's not
different
use it as an example,
variances.
please.
So, if we eliminated it, table of dimensions would be
Well, it would vary based on which zone it's in, right?
I'd rather not, like, off the cuff, be trying to eliminate that and come up with language on what the setback should be. I agree that that building side most parallel is kind of silly, but I understand that there was a reason behind it being added in there, and I wouldn't want to,
It may have been
Start
added in
looking
there
with
sometime because they had a particular problem.
yeah.
They
I
locked
can
in
look
town.
at the ordinance from like 2
'Cause-
years
yeah,
ago
'cause that
and
was
see
added
what
just
it,
in 21,
what it replaced,
so-
yeah.
Yeah,
Find out what that is.
Yeah.
Joanne, do you have anything else?
I don't believe so.
Does anyone have anything else?
Are we gonna be working on development regs or not? If not, motion to adjourn.
I could shuffle.
We're not doing development rights tonight.
Okay.
Somebody wanted a short meeting and we're already beyond it, so.
Okay.
And in development rights, we haven't even gotten back from, are these the copy we got back from Hoyle Tanner?
Yeah,
Yes.
I did a quick. All right, can I just ask one question on the?
You sure can, Barbara.
Thank you. All right, in the draft, Joanne, of the development reg, there is a you have on page 18, just so you take a note, or, okay, you've got it with you. Page 18. You don't need to, okay, you got it? Initial inquiry with Community Development Department required. We don't have a Community Development Department.
No.
And it says it's required. So, can you,
Insert the right department
I-
name in there.
I don't know what's required, so you need to probably pop an email to the woman who worked on these for us and say, what's up with the community,
Well, we thought you had one in your town.
and she knows what we've got. And then there is another place, if you can take a look at where they talk about town staff and town staff. And I'm like, who is supposed to be doing this? And, let me just see if I can find it.
Oh, you actually read that thing?
Well, no, we talked about it.
What did it have to do with?
I don't know, something really important.
You didn't dog ear the page?
I did dog ear the page, but now there's so many dog eared, I'm looking at them, I can't find it.
Well, then take your time, because if you go fast, you'll miss it. You'll
I
have to
know,
start
I've
over.
already missed it, so there you go. Oh, okay.
Good.
Process to, it's under, starting in page 49, it's the enforcement violation and penalties procedure. And on page 50, there's a process to avoid breach. And then it goes on to remedy to regulation breach and cease and desist. And you will see scattered without this, the town and administrative officer charged with enforcing the zoning ordinance. If the town identifies a violation, town staff will attempt to make contact with them. In another place, the town and administrative officer. So I think we,
Derek wanted me to change that to what you see because he didn't want a specific position in there, like code enforcement officer.
but calling it administrative officer,
Well,
It could be
that's what I said,
anybody.
because there's no
It could be a
definition
DPW
for
director,
administrative
it could be anybody.
officer.
all right, okay,
So-
so this was intentional.
Yes.
There's no plow truck driver.
Okay, but we talk about, so then it needs to be the same everywhere. Town or administrative officer or town staff, then what's town staff?
It's the director of the park department.
Town staff could be a truck driver. Because you remember.
All right, okay, it was intentional, I shall ask no more.
Could be the dog catcher.
well, it's intentional,
think
but
we
I
have
think that we need to adopt these regulations, so.
Dogs have
we'll
rights.
need
It's gonna have to be
Yeah.
figured
Make
out.
sure that it makes
But-
sense.
Remember what happened to Peanuts?
Hey, before I let Phil make his motion,
I already did, it's just,
no, you didn't make it, but I didn't hear it.
I did, I
The,
make a motion to adjourn.
I was in Pinardville the other day, I'm gonna ask staff. We had a discussion with the person who lives on, I believe it's Larch, about the fence location and the width of the driveway.
Yeah, that was,
Did that ever get resolved?
it did, yeah, they
Good,
cut the
that's all I wanna
driveways.
know.
That was like 2 years ago.
I know, but
Yeah.
sometimes these things go on without.
Yeah, no, it took a while, but they ended up, they cut it out and
Good.
they put stone
Thank
in
you,
there.
Scott, for that
And they
report.
moved.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn been made and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? We're done. Thank you, GTV.